We're going to be talking about, kind of the hallmarks of cozy fiction, what makes fiction cozy, and what genres of fiction can be cozy. And is cozy a genre itself, or is it more of a subgenre or an aesthetic? So we're going to be talking about all of those things today. So first, a little bit about me. You've all been here before. You all know me. I write science fiction and fantasy. I'm an editor with Tomeworks. I'm currently querying my novel. And I like writing cozy short stories in the science fiction and fantasy genre. And this is a picture of my cat getting cozy on my lap while I was working on this presentation. So everyone likes to get cozy sometimes, even cats. Maybe especially cats. All right, so what is cozy fiction? The kind of word cozy first started being applied to mystery novels that were gentler than what you normally saw in mystery genre, where you have the gritty detective who's off to solve the grisly murder and he's banging all these chicks and he's smoking cigarettes and he's in this dingy underground town, blah blah blah. So cozy mysteries are still mysteries in the sense that there is a person investigating a murder, but the story itself is less gritty, more gentle. And usually the investigator is an amateur, not like a professional detective.
Can I add some history just because I'm a
Go
nerd?
ahead.
Okay, so cozy actually started as what locked door mysteries would later be called locked door mysteries, because what it essentially meant was you were all stuck together. All of the people who were involved in this mystery are stuck together in a very cozy and cramped environment, and they're on each other's toes. But that necessitated a lot more description of that environment because you're not going anywhere. So they interact with one environment, and the details, like because of that, necessarily are much more crisp and I'm trying to think of the word, like voluminous is probably not the best word to put it, but there is a lot more information about the setting just simply because that's where they stay the entire time. So cozy wasn't initially like, oh, we're so sweet and we're all warmed up on this cold day. It was like, I can't move because you're in my way and we can't leave the room.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, it did, like, you first started seeing this, application of the term in mystery novels, and now you see it in a lot of different genres. And a lot of people think that, and like in cozy mysteries, at least now, like the more modern ones, the reason they're considered, part of the reason they're considered gentler, the murders are usually happening off screen. So there's not really any, or off the page. So there's not really any blood and gore on the page. And we'll talk a little bit more about cozy mysteries a little bit later when I get into all the different genres. A lot of people consider cozy to mean nothing bad happens in the book, which is false. That is patently false. Bad things happen to characters in cozy books all the time, but the bad things that are happening are less related to, like, a broad world defining, change or shift or war or, whatever, and are more centered around interpersonal conflicts. And so that's why they're kind of considered low stakes, because the stakes, if you're looking at it from a broad, like, societal or world perspective, the stakes are not very big. It's a shopkeeper whose shop burns down and they have to band together with their community to save it. That is or to rebuild it. That is the plot of a cozy book. And the stakes for the shopkeeper are very high because, they have lost their income, their livelihood, and they can't rebuild it by themselves. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of, like, the entire city that the shop is in, for the city the stakes are pretty low. Like, it's one shop in the whole city, whatever. So that's why it's generally said that cozy books are low stakes. In most genres that have cozy fiction, people and their daily lives are the point of the book. The point is not, some intergalactic conflict. There might be intergalactic conflict happening and it might affect the characters, but the point of the story is not resolving the intergalactic conflict. It's, building these relationships between these characters and how they change over time. And cozy also emphasizes, kind of moments of peace and warmth between characters. I have been moved to tears by cozy books because of the just emotion that is in them, way more often than any other genre of books because there's a lot of emotion happening between people that can be very moving. All right. So, is cozy fiction a genre, subgenre, or an aesthetic? This question I posed at the very beginning. So, cozy fiction, the cozy term is more of an, people apply it in terms of like, it's more of an ambiance or a tone than rigid rules for a genre. It kind of defines the focus of a story, where that focus is placed, not more so than like the story itself. And because it can be found in many genres, which we're going to talk about later, in my opinion, cozy is not a genre or a subgenre. It's an aesthetic that you can find in any book, in pretty much any genre. You could find a cozy book, just because they're not necessarily common in a particular genre doesn't mean they can't exist. You could write a book in any genre that emphasizes interpersonal relationships between characters and, the character arcs and character growth more so than any external plot. You could write that in any genre and it could be a cozy book. So what genres can be cozy? I've listed some here. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list. These are just broad genre umbrellas where you can find cozy books. Obviously mystery, we talked about that a little bit. Science fiction, fantasy, romance, even horror. All of these genres have had cozy books written within them. All of these broad genre umbrellas. Some of them obviously lend themselves more to being cozy than others. But, again, like I said, that doesn't mean it can't exist. So does anyone have any questions about cozy fiction at this point before we move into the separate genres? Everyone good? Okay, so first we're going to talk about cozy mystery. So again, we talked about this a little bit before, but what makes a mystery cozy? Like I said, they're gentler stories. You're not going to really find any or much on page blood or gore or graphic violence. The crime, the murder that starts off the mystery is occurring off the page. There's usually no explicit sex in cozy mysteries. And oftentimes the victim in a cozy mystery will be a bad person, like an objectively bad person. Because the goal is not for the reader to feel bad for the victim. The goal is for the reader to get caught up in the investigation and feel kind of peaceful with it at the same time. So often, and not always, but often in cozy mysteries, the victim will be someone who maybe deserved to be murdered or to, not be alive anymore. And again, often in cozy mysteries, the sleuths are amateurs. Often they're women. That's not always the case, but I think it just stems from like the readers of cozy mysteries tend towards being women, and so the main characters of cozy mysteries also tend towards being women. And the emphasis in cozy mysteries is on, figuring out, the investigator, like putting puzzle pieces together and figuring out plots and, their character development as they investigate this mystery. And mysteries in cozy mystery novels always emphasize brains over brawn. You're not going to have your amateur sleuth duking it out with some criminal in the final act. It's going to be, she solves the crime with her wits and, catches the criminal using her intelligence and her knowledge of the situation. So, some examples of cozy mystery, and Shannon might have more examples because I know you're more familiar with mystery genre than I am. I was reading about some of these when I was doing when I was making this presentation. I have not read any of these books, unfortunately, and I really want to now, so I think I'm going to add some of them to my TBR. But this first one, Louisiana Longshot, is actually, I would not consider this one to have an amateur sleuth. The main character is like a former FBI investigator or something. So I wouldn't really consider her to be an amateur sleuth. But apparently this one is hilarious. It is very highly rated. People like this book. And it's like a 29 book series or something. So, obviously this is successful. People like this cozy mystery. Quilt or Innocence, which I'm definitely going to buy a copy for my mom to read. So my mom is a big quilter and I've been buying her quilting books. But this one's also a series of quilters who solve mysteries in their small town. That sounds really interesting. And so anyway, but I'm losing my train of thought. So anyway, that's basically what cozy mystery is you have a focus is on the the amateur sleuth solving the crime with her wits. And the actual crime and blood and gore doesn't really make it on the page at all. We're not in some like gritty urban scenario necessarily. We're usually in, these, homey villages and, cottage settings and things like that in cozy mysteries. All right, cozy fantasy. Let's talk about that a little bit. This one is my personal favorite, cozy fantasy and science fiction. So what makes a fantasy cozy? This is a little bit different from cozy mystery, but it's also kind of the same in terms of what makes it cozy. I was talking about before low stakes from a worldwide perspective, but high stakes from a personal perspective of the character. The plots are generally more like, slice of life plots where the character is like going about their daily life and then something goes wrong and they have to figure out how to fix it and go back to how their daily life was. In a cozy fantasy, you will always find a lot of moments of joy, a lot of hopeful moments, happy endings. This is like the opposite of grimdark, okay? Like you've got happy endings, you've got, people banding together to solve a personal problem. You've got a lot of character growth. You've got, an emphasis on like people being good with a capital G. Like, at their heart, below everything else, people are inherently good is kind of like one of the themes of cozy fantasy. There's a lot of found family in cozy fantasy where, a character who, may feel like they don't fit in anywhere. Over the course of the book, they find their people. They find their found family. And the journeys in cozy fantasy are very personal versus in something like epic fantasy where the hero's going on a quest to save the world or to topple a regime. In cozy fantasy, the hero is learning who they are as a person and creating deeper connections with the people around them in a fantasy setting. So, and you'll find a tone of like kindness and gentleness in cozy fantasy as well. So some examples of cozy fantasy, Legends and Lattes is kind of the big one. Recently, I think a lot of people have at least heard of Legends and Lattes, if not read it. This is a very good book. I really liked it. Some people might find it, kind of trite, but it's a woman, setting up a coffee shop and having to figure out how to keep it open despite several trials and tribulations throughout the book. And then, also, learning to kind of trust people throughout the course of the book as well. So it's very good. If you want a, cozy, feel-good story, definitely pick this up and read it. The House in the Cerulean Sea has also been very popular lately. It just had a sequel that came out. I just read this a couple of months ago, and it moved me to tears several times. This book is very much about found family, and it's very emotional and moving. So I did really like this book. And let's see, The House Witch, I have not read. I've heard really good things about it. It's about a witch who gets hired to serve dinner in a castle, and then he has to deal with all the palace intrigue and that swirls around that. And then this last one is kind of a question mark. I think it's cozy. So I read this book. This is A Natural History of Dragons, and it's a fictional memoir about a woman scientist who studies dragons. And I thought this book was cozy when I read it, but it came out, I think, too early to have that label applied to it. It's kind of, I don't know exactly when it came out, but it's like, in the 2000s or 2010s, and the cozy word did not really start being applied to fantasy until like the late 20-teens and early 2020s. So
I was gonna say, I think I really started seeing like cozy fantasy pop up around COVID.
Yeah, which I am going to talk about later. So, but yeah, cozy fantasy, you didn't really start seeing that until like the early 2020s. So, which I hate saying the early 2020s, but we're in the mid 2020s now, so I gotta. But yeah, I like looking back on this book, I would consider it to be cozy now, but it doesn't have that label applied to it really because it just came out too early to catch that. But this is also a very good book, and it's a series. I haven't gotten back around to reading the rest of the series, but I need to. But yeah, it's really good. But it focuses on the female scientist and how she kind of like, she wants to study dragons, but she's a woman, and so people don't want her to, risk. She's in like, Victorian age, and so people don't want her to like do anything because she's supposed to like stay in the house and look pretty. So it's, the story of like how she kind of like, rebels against that and comes into her own as a woman scientist and, just happens to study dragons. So definitely pick that up if you like dragons and female empowerment. The next one is cozy science fiction. This one, what makes sci-fi cozy is pretty much the same thing as what makes fantasy cozy. They pair really well together. Sci fantasy, cozy science fiction is going to be high tech, low stakes. Again, low in quotation marks because it's not low stakes to the characters, it's low stakes to the world at large. The narratives generally in cozy science fiction are heartwarming. Again, you've got personal journeys and found family in cozy science fiction. You'll find a lot of focus on like the joy of technology, like, science fiction technology and space travel. So characters in cozy fantasies often like, they're just like traveling through space for the joy of it because they love, discovering new places and, being able to travel the galaxy. You'll also find utopian futures in cozy sci-fi a lot. So when I was like reading about cozy books for this presentation, I saw a lot of people saying that the solar punk genre is inherently cozy. I don't know if I agree with that, but they were saying that solar punk is inherently cozy because it focuses on, quote, utopian futures where, we figured out the climate crisis and, we've learned to live with the land and with the climate instead of against it. And, whatever, we've solved the energy crisis, we're doing clean energy and, blah, blah, blah. So, but yeah, I don't know if I necessarily agree with solar punk being inherently cozy. Obviously it can be cozy. And, maybe a lot of the more popular solar punk stories are cozy, but that doesn't mean that they're inherently cozy. It's like with any genre. I don't think any genre is inherently cozy because cozy is an aesthetic, not a genre. And again, like a lot of cozy sci-fi is, kind of comforting, optimistic, and, maybe kind of whimsical and weird a little bit. So you find a lot of like kind of cool stuff in cozy sci-fi. So some examples, A Psalm for the Wild-Built. I just read this last month and it is so short. It's a novella, so it's very short. It is fantastic. Becky Chambers, as an author, has a chokehold on cozy sci-fi. Okay, like I had a hard time finding cozy sci-fi that she did not write because she's so good at it. It's her brand. It's her thing. And A Psalm for the Wild-Built, I think I would also consider to be solar punk because it does have those like those elements of solar punk where we've solved the climate crisis, or at least, we've learned how to, live with the climate crisis and, develop clean energy and, focus on, building a more just future and things like that. So, but definitely if you are interested in cozy sci-fi, definitely pick this up. I highly recommend Psalm for the Wild-Built. I believe it has a sequel, but again, like I just read it. So, and then the other one, A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. This is more space opera cozy. This is also a very good book, and it deals with, kind of a ragtag alien crew who's trying to figure out how to work together and, get past their differences to, go where they want to go, do their thing. The destination is not important in this book, okay? The destination is not important. It's about the journey. So I don't even remember if they got to their destination in this book, okay? Like, I don't remember if they even got there. The book is about the journey.
It's got sequels. They go other places, don't
Yeah,
worry.
they do have sequels. Yeah. Yeah, there are at least 2 sequels to this book. But this book is also very good. If you like space opera and you want to find like a cozy version, definitely check this book out. I have Murderbot on here, All Systems Red. I put an asterisk on it because I love this book. It's also very short. It's also a novella. And I think all of the sequels are novellas as well. A lot of people would not consider this to be cozy. And I'm not sure if I consider it to be cozy because there is like gore and violence happening on the page. But like most cozy books, the focus of the story is not on the gore and violence. It's on the interpersonal world of Murderbot and Murderbot developing interpersonal relationships with its humans. So this one kind of
I'm going to say it's cozy because on the very first page, Murderbot decides once it has the capacity to kill, it's just going to watch TV instead.
That's true. That's true. That's true. That is very true. Yeah, I think for me, this one kind of toes the line between being cozy and not cozy. I would read it as like a comfort read. So, maybe it kind of is cozy. I do need to get back to the rest of the series because I've only read the first one. I do that. I read the first book of like 10 different series and then I circle back around and read the second book of like 10 different series. So I need to get back to this one. And then the last one I have on here is actually kind of an older book. This is Remnant Population by Elizabeth Moon. And I saw this, I have not read this book, but I saw it recommended on several Reddit threads as cozy sci-fi. And I read the plot synopsis and I actually kind of agree. So it's about like an older woman she chooses to stay behind on a planet when like her colony fails, and she develops this relationship with the native species of the planet. And then when humans come back, she has to like, try to get the humans to, acknowledge this native species of the planet and work with them instead of, wiping them out and claiming the planet as their own. So I do think that this could be considered cozy because it focuses more on like, her, at least as far as I understand, based on the plot synopsis, focuses more on this woman's, life and her own personal journey and stakes versus like, the bigger stakes of humans colonizing other planets. So anyway, I think I'm going to add this to my TBR. I might check it out. It sounded interesting. And also the owl people on the cover are very intriguing. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to check that one out. So cozy romance is the next one. And so I said when I started, some genres lend them to cozy more than others. Romance lends itself to cozy. At least certain subgenres of romance lend themselves to being cozy more so than other genres. When I think of romance, and I don't read a ton of romance, I read some, but not a lot. I'm thinking of like, very sweet Hallmark Christmas movie contemporary romances. That's kind of the first thing that comes to mind when I think romance. And that, like that like kind of very specific subgenre of romance lends itself very well to being cozy. In a cozy romance, the main conflict is kind of external to the couple. Maybe it's their families fighting or something like that, but the couple is not in conflict. This is not, enemies to lovers or, hate sex type of situation. This is like, the couple is like, yes, we love each other. Our families hate each other, and we have to figure out how to get our families to like each other so that we can be together. Something like that, right? There is low angst between the central couple, and any conflicts in like a cozy romance are going to be resolved through communication and understanding of the other people. Generally, in cozy romance, heat level is sweet or sensual, which means a sweet romance has no explicit sex. All the sex is closed door. A sensual romance has at least one sex scene that happens on the page, but the focus is not necessarily on the anatomy of the sex. It's on the kind of like emotional connection that happens during the sex. I hope Daphne is proud of me memorizing those definitions. She's not here, but I hope somewhere, wherever she is, she can feel that I did research and got those definitions right.
A plus, A plus. You passed the test.
But yeah, so in a cozy romance, we're focusing more on the emotional development of the relationship between the characters rather than, the boinking. In a cozy romance, community is important. So, a character's friends, family is going to be really important to them, which is why a lot of times in a cozy romance, you'll find the family coming into conflict. And the main kind of crux of the book is the couple having to resolve this family conflict so that they can be together, because otherwise, well, I can't be with you because my mom really hates your family and I just can't be with someone who my mom can't get along with their family. So the community that the couple has around themselves is very important to those characters. So there's a lot of like secondary characters that are important in cozy romance. And cozy romances also tend towards small town settings. I mentioned Hallmark Christmas movies. That's really what you should think. If you're trying to imagine cozy romance, think a Hallmark style Christmas movie. Small, the big city girl comes home to her small town and, rediscovers this guy that she knew when she was in high school, and they fall in love, and then they have to, solve some problem with, maybe some like big conglomerate is coming in to try to buy his farm, and she has to figure out how to save it, and then they can be together.
They also have to go to the Christmas tree farm first, and there's a bunch of parties with
Yeah.
wine and great food and old friends and reminiscing.
Yeah.
Oh, and they go down like a hill on the sled and they have these like joyful experiences that are all in the middle of it. But
Yes.
it wouldn't be cozy without.
Right, exactly. Yes. There's a lot of, peaceful moments and, curling up by the fire with a nice comfy blanket. My mom really likes these Hallmark style Christmas movies. And so every Christmas I try to find a new one for her to watch. And so the last couple of years we watched Castle for Christmas, which is about an author who is trying to move to Scotland, and she's trying to buy this castle from the grumpy owner, and they fall in love. And then and then the one we watched this past year was, I think it was called A Christmas Quilt, and the character, or the male character, has to learn how to quilt from the female character because he has to make a wedding quilt for his sister because she's getting married and their mom is dead, so their mom can't make it. So he's going to surprise his sister with a wedding quilt. So they fall in love as she's teaching him how to quilt. Anyway, so yeah, so that's what makes a romance cozy. Some examples of cozy romance, and you'll notice on here, two of these are cozy romantasy because that's what I am familiar with. So, The League of Gentlewomen Witches and Sword Heart, I would consider both of these to be cozy romances. Cozy, but they're also fantasy as well, so they're like cozy romantasy. Now, The League of Gentlewomen Witches does have kind of an enemies to lovers plot, which is unusual in a cozy, but they're very half-hearted enemies, even from the very beginning. They don't want to fight against each other at all. And it's really, the only reason they're really in conflict with each other ever is because of their communities are in conflict with each other. So this was a very good book. It made me laugh several times. And it does follow that the heat level rule as well. There's only one actual sex scene in this book, and it's not super explicit. So, but this was a very good book. I really liked it. And then Sword Heart, which I read recently, which I thought was very good. This is about a woman who discovers a sword that has an ancient warrior bound to it, or his soul is bound to it, and he can like manifest out of the sword. Anyway, they go on like a little fantasy adventure and they fall in love with each other. So, and then they have to, he's like, well, but I'm bound to the sword. Anyway, it's a whole big thing. He's bound to the sword, and that's actually the main point of conflict in this book, is that he's bound to the sword and he doesn't really want to be anymore. So these are both very good books. If you're looking for, cozy romantasy, definitely pick these up. I was also reading about some other cozy romances. So Twice Shy is more of a cozy contemporary romance. Takes place in a small town, kind of rural setting. The male character is it almost is like the grumpy sunshine trope, except we find out he's not grumpy. He's just really introverted and has a hard time talking to people. So that sounds like a really cute book, and I do want to check it out because I do like a little cute romance story. And then Letters to Half Moon Street is actually an epistolary romance, which sounded really interesting when I read about it, but was highly recommended on romance boards as a cozy romance. So, and this one is gay. So if you're looking for a male romance that's cozy, I recommend checking this one out. Okay, now the last one that I have to talk about. How am I doing on time? Okay, I'm doing great. The last genre umbrella that I have to talk about is cozy horror. I've been kind of checking the chat occasionally. I have seen some discussion of whether the possibility of cozy horror and whether horror can be cozy. I'm going to tell you it absolutely can, and it has been many times. So we're going to talk about what makes a cozy horror story. Cozy horror is often described as comfortably scary, where you have scary things happening. Obviously, like there's spooky vibes, you're doing horror things. There's maybe ghosts, there's maybe eldritch beings, whatever. Like, yes, it is horror. You are going to be scared and kind of on the edge of your seat reading a book like this, but it's comfortably scary. The horror and the tension and the terror is all paired with moments of peace, warmth, and humor that kind of come in at an opportune time to kind of allow that horror tension to ease so that it can be ramped right back up again and you can be on the edge of your seat again. Often, cozy horror takes place in homey. Someone said "rutro raggy" in the chat. Honestly, I would probably consider Scooby Doo to be cozy horror. I would. That counts, and it's also mystery, so it's like a cozy horror mystery. But cozy horror often takes place in kind of homey haunted houses, spooky forests, settings that are like scary, but not too scary, if that makes sense. And usually in a cozy horror, almost everyone gets out. Not everyone's gonna get out, but almost everyone gets out, usually in a cozy horror. You're not gonna have everyone die at the end of a cozy horror book. So some examples. One of which I have read. I don't read a ton of horror. I have read What Moves the Dead. This is a how to describe it. This is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher with mushrooms. That's probably the best way to describe it. It's very good. I really liked this book. And it's written by T. Kingfisher, who you will note was also the author of Sword Heart on my cozy romance page. So authors who write cozy books often write more than one cozy book. But I would definitely consider this to be cozy horror, and I did see it recommended on a lot of message boards as cozy horror. I really liked it. I thought it was very good. And it's about, the main character has to, shows up at the Usher house and has to figure out what the hell is going on with their friends. And it's spooky, and there's these moments in it of, where you can just like, where it feels very homey. And they're having tea around a roaring fire, and everyone's not really happy because they're freaked out by what's going on. So like the characters are not happy and cozy, but it feels cozy to read. So that's kind of the vibe that comes off of this. Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. I have not read. I really want to read this because he writes fantastic cozy horror short stories. I've read a few of his short stories and they're very good. This book is also nominated for a Nebula Award right now, but I see tentacles and a witch on the cover, so
So it's great.
you've read
I
it.
don't know if Daphne, oh yeah. I don't know if Daphne has put my review up for our Tomework stuff, but that was like the first one I reviewed this year. If you go in knowing it is going to be a cozy, it's perfect. It's mwah. It's like lesbian asexual romance with a bunch of cuddles and sweetness. And it juxtaposes the fact that the monster main character does not have a singular kind of body and like limps around on fake legs and like eats people. Like it works so well when it shouldn't. It is a great story. But you have to know it's cozy because there are sections where you're like, well, wait, there's adventure. And it's like, no, we're just gonna stay in the hotel inn and we're gonna cuddle. We're gonna talk about how kissing is weird. But no, it's a really enjoyable book if you want to see what it looks like. And it's not like all of it is super fun because there is death and there's like fighting and there's family drama and a bunch of other stuff, but it is securely cozy.
Yeah. That's like I think what makes kind of cozy horror different from the other cozy genres, and this is only like a very slight difference, right? The characters in a cozy horror, at least as far as my experience goes, are always slightly unsettled. Even in those cozy moments where they're, cuddling or, having tea around the fire with a blanket or, whatever. Even in those moments, the characters are kind of unsettled with what's happening, but the vibe that the scene gives off to the reader is just like the coziest vibes.
This
So,
may not be the place to put it, but like what I have gotten from the cozy horror that I have read, because most of the time the cozy horror focuses on somebody who is either ostracized from society or does not think the same way as others, is that cozy horror is something where neuroatypical readers and characters thrive because the whole fucking world is horrifying. And this like delves into the fact that you are always kind of unsettled and you are always unmoored from the same reality that the normal people around you experience. And
yeah.
so this just like you're like, okay, cool. Like we're connecting now. It's supposed to be scary as shit, but it's not because the whole world is scary as shit. Thank you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, that holds true for What Moves the Dead because the main character is transgender. And there's a lot of like reflection on that and how the other characters relate to them, in addition to like all of these like horror moments as well. So yeah, that's a really interesting point. A couple other ones that I read about when I was looking into cozy horror, Cackle. This one was very highly recommended. And I think the author has written a couple of other cozy horror novels as well. But this one is about as far as I remember, because it was like 3 days ago when I was doing this, who she sort of forms a relationship with a woman in town who's, really interested in her life and slowly discovers that that woman is a witch who feeds on the life force of other women to remain young and beautiful forever. So this is apparently a very good book. I do want to read this. Apparently it has very very witchy vibes. And then the last one on here is How to Sell a Haunted House, which is by the same author of the Final Girl Support Group, which I think has been mentioned in a writer's lunch before. The title was familiar. I think maybe Daphne talked about it once. But this one is about a woman moving back to her childhood home, which is haunted, and then having to figure out how to sell it. So definitely, if you are looking for horror that is, more comfortably scary, which like that's right up my alley for horror. Like I have a hard time reading a lot of genres of horror because I get freaked out and anxious and my brain goes really weird places. But cozy horror is like right up my alley. So I need to read more of these books because I did really like What Moves the Dead. I thought that was a very good book. Okay. So we have about 10 minutes left. I see some things in the chat. Let's see. Have you ever seen the movie Death Becomes Her? I have not, but I've heard good things about that movie. And then Grady's newest book is definitely not cozy. Oh, good to know. I won't check that one out then. So the growing popularity of the cozy genre. Let's talk about this a little bit more because, like we've talked about, the word was first applied to certain subgenres of mystery novels, and you didn't really see it applied more broadly until pretty much very recently. And it still really isn't applied to romance so much because when I was looking for cozy romance, people don't really call them cozy romance. That's not like what they're called, but that's what they are, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
normally sweet and clean romances hit the beats of what we expect for
Mhm.
cozy, but they already had that nomenclature.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the growing popularity. So why has cozy been growing in popularity recently? My answer to this is another question, which is who wants to read grimdark when real life is grim enough? Which like that's kind of where I'm at. It's like why would I want to read grimdark fantasy when I can just look out my window and see it happening in real life? So I would much rather read cozy than grimdark at this point in my life. And cozy fiction trends up as things in society gets bad or things in society get bad. Readers are kind of looking to, escape and be comforted and enjoy their time reading, and not be depressed by the books they read. And cozy fiction often offers emotional release as well. Like I said, I've been moved to tears more by cozy books than any other genre of fiction I have ever read. So, if you're looking for, a good cry, if you're looking for a good cry, go read a very emotional, cozy story because sometimes, the moment of crying is cathartic. And like Shannon mentioned before, there was an explosion in cozy fiction, particularly like cozy fantasy during and immediately following the COVID-19 pandemic, which makes sense, right? Because, people are not looking for, there were agents like during the pandemic posting on Twitter, like, do not send me pandemic stories. I do not want those. We are not looking at those right now. Do not send me pandemic stories. So, no one wants to read about, people dying of a mysterious illness when people are dying of a mysterious illness in real life. So yeah, people like to feel
I hate to
hopeful.
say it, but that's not true because no, it's weird because, well, generally speaking, media
Mhm.
absorption happened at a much higher rate during the
Yeah,
pandemic. But it was like the
that's true.
polar opposites. More people were like looking into pandemic and like whole wipeout, like civilization wipeout dystopia. And they got really big into the cozy and sweet stuff. So it was like this
Mhm.
giant dichotomy. It wasn't this, the middle ground didn't have the same level of like rise.
Yeah,
But yeah, so I'm gonna be quiet now. But like people, they mourn in very different ways, right? Like it's
yeah. That's valid. That's absolutely fair. Yeah, that's interesting though that, at least all of the agents that I followed on Twitter were all like no pandemic stories. So that's interesting that like they were kind of bucking the trend of the publishing industry at the time because they didn't want to read it.
I think maybe part of it has to do with the fact that like people who wrote a lot of those stories were self-published.
Yeah.
And I'm huge, I'm not huge, but I spend a lot of time in those spheres and listening to people and like people being afraid. They're like, oh crap, I just came out with this like virus, like book series. I'm screwed. And then 3 weeks later, they're like, actually, and then people are like, oh yeah, I wrote this thing about a virus that like knocked everybody out. And my books are, so it
Oh
is
God.
interesting. But
Yeah.
sorry not to.
No, no, that's good. Yeah, that's interesting. I myself would not want to read pandemic fiction right now or during the worst part of the pandemic. Oh, so that was my last slide. What was I had one other thing I was going to mention. What was it? I don't remember. I don't remember what it was. So it must not have been important. So that's all I have for our writer's lunch on cozy fiction. If anyone has any questions, definitely pop them in the chat. If you have cozy books that you really like, pop them in the chat. I'm going to scroll through a little bit. We have like, about 5 minutes, so we can chat a little bit if y'all want about cozy fiction. I was kind of keeping an eye on the chat, but I couldn't really read it in detail. Okay, I see some recommendations for cozy horror. That's good.
Dean brings up an interesting point. He said after World War II, the Universal monsters lost their appeal for a time because the real world was much scarier after the war.
Yeah, House with Good Bones. Yeah, I've seen that recommended. I haven't read it yet though, but I do really like T. Kingfisher's writing style. So I want to pick up more of her books. Well, cool.
I do, this is just like another random tidbit, but one of the things that I find is very interesting is cozy books and literary fiction have a lot more to do with each other than people realize. And it may be one of the reasons why the emotional content of cozies is able to kind of get you a little bit more because both of them really focus in on the day to day. Like the world building must be there, but it's the day to day struggles and the sort of like the normal that's not the abnormal that really impacts you emotionally. So you're able to empathize with the characters more, even if they're in like weird situations, because there is so much focus on. I don't want to say like banal, like that's not the word I'm looking for, but like just standard life. And so I think that's very interesting. Cozy, I think, kind of makes it seem like it's whimsical, but that isn't always necessarily true.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I did see a question pop up in the chat. What about Hitchhiker's Guide? It's been a long time since I've read Hitchhiker's Guide, so that is my caveat on what I'm about to say about it. I personally wouldn't consider it to be cozy. I would consider it to be a comedy, like a space opera comedy or a comedic space opera. I wouldn't really consider it to be cozy because at least like from what I remember, it doesn't really focus on the focus is more external to the characters than like internal, at least as far as I remember. Again, it's been a very long time since I read it. So, but yeah, that's all. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I would agree. The satire elements make fun of everyday life and normal stuff and how stupid it is, but the actual plot is, it's epic.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thanks everyone for
You,
coming to Writer's Lunch today. It was great to have you all here. I hope you enjoyed our discussion of cozy fiction. And if you are into reading cozy fiction, I hope you have some good books to add to your TBR from my recommendations. Definitely come back next week. Ian's going to be talking about, creating your like ideal writing space or ideal writing zone. So that should be interesting. I know I want to be here for that one because I have had a hard time creating an ideal space for me to focus on writing recently. So hopefully that will be helpful for all of us. All right. Well, again, thanks for coming and
you.
we'll see you
Thank
next
you,
week.
AP.